Hello and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're looking at the Sun King's Salvation encounter in Castle Nathria.
So this fight is likely to be one of the earlier bosses you'll encounter throughout the instance, and it's a Valeria Dreamwalker style fight where you have to heal the boss up to full to end the encounter whilst dealing with plenty of waves of ads. There's a fair amount to go over here, so we're just going to jump straight into it.
So Kel'Thas is sitting up on a raised platform overlooking the fight space, and this is the guy that you need to heal all the way to full to end the fight. How much attention you can put into healing this guy over the rest of your raid depends on what ads are up and what situation the rest of the raid is in, but typically we had around half our healers slam Kel'Thas the majority of the time, whilst the other half of the healers covered the raid. Now the rest of the raid who can't cast heals on him can still help heal him by using one of the 4 soul pedestals underneath him. When you click on one of these, this will channel your own health into the boss. Whilst doing so, you do take increasing damage from this channel as a stacking 2-minute debuff, which also prevents you from using the pedestal again, so you can't use this constantly throughout the fight. Now this soul pedestal mechanic was pretty different on every single test we did. On some tests it felt very powerful, and others it did less healing to the boss than what was required from the healers to keep the channeling players alive. So we're not exactly sure how it's going to work on live. But it seems likely that you want to rotate your raid using this pedestal channel whenever there is downtime during the fight, just keeping a steady flow of stronger healing output onto the boss than your healers can provide directly. Now once you've gotten Kel'Thas to 40% and 90% health, a shade of him will appear in the fight space and Kel'Thas will become immune to all healing. You've got to kill this shade so you can start healing Kel'Thas again. Now this shade has a few abilities. It has a frontal cone faced towards the tank. This just applies a stacking dot, so you want to swap whenever your stack drops whilst facing the boss away from the raid. The shade also has another frontal cone, but this one is targeted at a random raid member whenever he reaches 100 energy, and this one is avoidable. So we had the entire raid stood closely behind, and the moment the blazing surge was cast, you could quickly just move around the boss to avoid it. This ability will also spawn fires everywhere that deal ticking damage, so having the cone face directly behind the boss every single time will help keep the room clear. Having the raid somewhat stacked whilst fighting this enemy is also useful for when he casts Ember Blast. This debuff is applied to a random player, and when it expires, it deals damage split between all players within 6 yards of the target. This hurts a fair amount, so you do want a good third or so of your raid to help split the damage, but don't bung everybody in, as people hit do get a dot, which was just excess damage for no reason. Last to mention is the Reborn Phoenix ads. These guys will spawn the fire patches whilst chasing down random raid members, doing damage to anyone within 6 yards of them. By having the raid stacked behind the boss, the ads kind of end up funneling and are easily dotted and cleaved down by your ranged DPS. When these ads die, they'll reanimate after around 20 seconds and just begin to chase people again. The only way you can permanently remove them is once the shade is removed. So you want to focus most, if not all, of your damage into the shade and just slow and dot and cleave the Phoenix ads down just to keep them at bay. Once you've done 10% of the shade's health to it in damage, he will despawn and you can go back to healing Kel'Thas again, who has gained 10% of his max HP, and the fight continues as normal. So next to talk about is all of the 6 different ads.
High Torturer Darathos is seen right at the start of the fight and doesn't come back once you've killed him. He'll channel Greater Castigation into multiple members of your raid, dealing pulsing AoE damage to them and any players within 6 yards of them. If you're targeted, you just got to make sure you move away from others. With him right at the start of the fight is also 2 assassins, and more of these will spawn as the fight goes on. These guys will mark random players, teleport behind them, and then shortly afterwards apply a very nasty bleed to them and anyone nearby. This was the deadliest ability in the fight, as at points a lot of these assassins can be up, and it's really easy to splash the bleed onto extra raid members, especially if melee is slow to move out once they're marked. So it's vital to react to this fast when you are targeted and move away from others. When the assassins get low, they'll begin to channel Return to Stone. This 8-second channel will heal them to full, so you need to make sure you kill them off before this cast finishes. On the pool, you'll also have occultists. These guys will occasionally teleport to a random location in the room, making them really annoying for melee. Their main ability is Scornful Blast, which deals a burst of shadow damage to a random player. The last ability that they'll cast is Vulgar Brand. This ability is listed as hitting the entire raid, however while we were testing it didn't seem to do that and instead would only hit a few people, doing a burst of shadow damage to them and then debuff with increased damage taken for 15 seconds. So these occultist ads, they don't have too much health, but do become problematic if they're completely ignored, so you'll want to interrupt everything they cast and just kill them off as soon as possible. When they die, they'll drop an Essence Font on the ground. This friendly target will slowly lose health over time. Healers will want to top them as soon as possible, as this will heal Kel'Thas to 1% of his maximum health, which across the entire fight actually adds up to quite a lot. Around 30 seconds or so into the fight, you'll see your first Rockbound Vanquisher. This bat applies a stacking physical dot on the tank as well as doing bursts of raid damage after a cast, with each cast doing 25% more damage each time. So whilst it's not vital to nuke the bat immediately, you cannot ignore him forever as eventually the raid damage will just become way too much for your healers to handle. Next to mention is the Pestering Fiends. These guys have very little health and spam cast Shattering Ruby, dealing damage to a random player and all targets within 3 yards of that player. What's really bad about these guys, however, is that when they die, they explode, dealing a burst of damage to all players within 7 yards. So whilst you want everyone in your raid to kill them off, it's fundamental that tanks and melee are fast to move from them once they're on low health to avoid potentially being globalled in a combo with other incoming sources of damage. And last to mention is the Soul Infusers. These guys are spawned on the far side of the room away from the pedestals and will slowly travel towards them. Once they reach, they'll begin to channel Soul Infusion, removing Kel'Thas's health pretty fast. So as a result, it's vital that these ads die well before they reach the pedestals. We decided to crowd control 2 of them on one side whilst killing the 2 on the other side, at which point once they're dead we can then return and kill the CC'd set. Staggering them like this is also very useful for your healers, as when these ads die they'll also drop an orb that will last on the ground for around 20 seconds or so before they despawn. Clicking this orb will soak it up, giving the player 50% increased healing for 14 seconds, and this affects stacks. So just before the debuff times out, you'll want to refresh it by picking up a new orb, giving you an additional stack. So if you timed it perfectly, you'll have almost a full minute of doing drastically increased healing. You'll want only a single healer to do this to make the most of being able to stack this buff up, and ideally it will be best on a healer that does the most single target healing into Kel'Thas. But with all the ads explained, that's pretty much the fight. You just kill ads and heal the boss to 40%, the shade will come out, you need to take 10% off, you then go back to healing up the boss and killing the ads until you get to 90%, you then kill the shade off and you're done. One thing we should mention is that the ads spawn in a set pattern. We're not going to cover it here in this video, but do expect it in a live guide if it is important. And to add, we're not even sure if this pattern is supposed to continue whilst the shade is up during phase 2. In some tests the ads would continue to spawn, in others they just completely stop the moment phase 2 started. So what version of the fight we get on live we just simply don't know. As for Mythic, there really isn't that many changes on the fight aside from a cast that Kel'Thas does that pretty much just one-shots your raid. He'll just gain a healing absorption shield and cast Unleashed Pyroclasm. If you break the shield by spam healing him, the cast is interrupted, so this forces all of your healers, as well as probably all your hybrid DPS players in your raid, to keep a real close eye on the boss, ready to spam him the moment the cast starts. There's also room for potentially being clever with the fonts that are on the ground that the ads drop, as well as using the pedestals at this point just as a way of breaking the shield. And the shade in phase 2 also has this cast, but instead of a healing absorption shield, it's a damage absorption shield. You just need to break the shield to interrupt the cast. The only other change of the fight on Mythic is that the Phoenix ads from phase 2 will not despawn when you go back into phase 1, so you're going to have Phoenixes up for the entire fight, which could potentially be a complete nightmare with all the fires that are going across the room. But it's likely you'll just want to deal with them the same way that you did on Heroic, except you're going to apply probably more CC than you did before, and perhaps you won't even damage them at all. But who knows, we'll have to wait until live to really find that one out. But that's the encounter. What are our thoughts?
So if you break the fight down into its individual mechanics, it's fine. There's like very little wrong with it, and there are enough things for you to do to keep your brain moving.
Yeah.
For you, like as a positive note for DPS, this fight is kind of fun. You know, here's like a billion ads. Have fun AoEing it all down. Although it is a little bit of a kick in the teeth that they introduce this kind of fight when everyone's just become target capped. I must admit my barrages were very sad, but it's still kind of fun. You know, you'll get over it, and you know, AoEing a shit ton of stuff down all at once whilst dragging it all in, it can be quite chaotic. It does feel fun for the classes that have those tools available. And for healers, it's kind of nice having one of these sort of fights again. It's nothing new by any means, but of course, having a fight where you have to heal the boss up to full, it gives you loads of room to, you know, flex your muscles as a healer a little bit, especially when you've got the whole element of min-maxing the orbs and having to swap to the fonts on the ground, and maybe even on Mythic where the boss gains that shield, you maybe want to try and assign, okay, we're going to use a lay on hands for this, or we're going to use your healing cooldowns for this bit just to break through the shield. Okay, all of the hybrid healers you're going to have to help out at this point, so there's got that sort of puzzle element to it that I'm sure a lot of people enjoy trying to work out. Going to the more kind of sour part of the fight for me at least is the ad timings. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of having these ads spawn during phase 2. When you're trying to deal with the shade, I would much prefer the fight just to be, okay, ads, that's great, you're dealing with loads of them, and then whilst you're fighting the shade, it's not necessarily a lull because he has his own like powerful mechanics, but it's kind of a different change of pace rather than it's just literally, I'm killing ads for 6 minutes, it's, no, I'm killing them for 2 minutes, then I've got a single target boss, and then I'm dealing with them for 2 minutes again, and then I've got a single target boss again. It just changes up the flow of the fight, and I think that's a much better way of doing it rather than, oh, okay, we're about to get the boss to 40%. What ads do we have up? Which ads are going to be spawning next? Maybe we should hold off on healing the boss to make it so that we can go into that phase and less bad ads would spawn during that time. It's starting to sound really fiddly. It's starting to sound a little bit like Zakul from the Eternal Palace a little bit again.
Yeah.
So for me, I'd prefer if it was just, okay, you deal with any sort of ads that you got left over, focus on the shade a little bit, and then go back into the ad phase.
Because they have a set spawn pattern, and it doesn't change on a pull-by-pull basis, there is always going to be the best time to push the boss. So that might require you to sit for, like, I don't know, a minute until you get the ad wave that's really easy to deal with, or you don't get the really nasty ad wave with the 6 assassins. I mean, dealing with that 6 assassin wave during phase 2 is going to be a complete mess, because the raid needs to be stacked because you need to make sure you bait the cone in the right direction. But if everyone's also getting targeted by the assassin bleed, that's just not possible. Someone's going to get hit by the cone, or the entire raid's going to get hit by the bleed. The result is not good either way. So I think I'm with you there. I think the ad timer completely stopping once you've pushed the boss is definitely the play. Or to make it so maybe a new ad wave starts that's completely different to the current wave, which doesn't have crazy overlaps that are essentially, impossible to deal with or very difficult to deal with.
Oh, kind of like a light trickle of ads.
Yeah.
That. Yeah, I think that would be all right.
Maybe
especially
you just
if it's
get loads
like
of the
tuned properly.
fiends.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. I think that kind of thing might be able to work. The only other thing that's a little bit of a question mark for me is the pedestals. They're very inconsistent across the testings that we've done. This boss has been tested a whole lot. Sometimes they're really, really efficient at healing the boss. Other times they literally do more damage to the player than they heal the boss by a large margin, making it super inefficient to use them. So we're not entirely sure what direction they're going to take with these pedestals. They might even be looking to remove them potentially, just because of the way that, like on the most recent test, they were practically useless, making it to kind of see what the fight would be like without using them. So I kind of like the idea of maybe having those pedestals available during downtime, because it's like kind of something to do to kind of help contribute towards healing the boss. I think they're a good idea.
Especially with the boss on farm.
Yeah, exactly. But right now it just feels a little bit like, why are they there? It seems like it hasn't been nailed down properly. It could just be a bug, or maybe they're just trying things out, but that's the whole point of beta in the end. But anyway, guys, that's where we're going to leave it today. Thanks for watching. As always, we'll keep our Wowhead guide updated, so do go and check it out. And we'll also have a live guide available for this encounter when it comes out later this year or next year. We're not sure what's going on with the raid schedule anymore. Take it easy, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Take care.